The woman calling security on the homeless black man in the hospital lobby had no idea she was trying to remove the very person who had built every room, funded every machine, and made her job possible in the first place. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight, turning the October evening into a symphony of water against windows and the distant rumble of thunder. Dr. Sarah Mitchell pulled her BMW into the covered parking garage of St. Mary's Children's Hospital, her designer heels clicking against the concrete as she hurried toward the main entrance. She was already running late for the board meeting, the monthly gathering where she, as head of pediatric surgery, would present her department's financial needs to the hospital's board of directors. Tonight was particularly important. She needed approval for the new cardiac surgery wing that could save dozens of children's lives each year. What doctor? Mitchell didn't notice as she rushed through the rain was the figure sitting quietly on the bench outside the main entrance. A black man in his early 50s, wearing a worn denim jacket that had seen better days, jeans with a small tear at the knee, and work boots that spoke of honest labor. His hair was damp from the rain and he held a simple manila envelope in his weathered hands. To anyone passing by, he looked like what polite society might call undesirable. Someone who didn't belong in the pristine lobby of one of the city's most prestigious medical facilities. But appearances, as the next hour would prove, could be catastrophically deceiving. The man's name was Dr. Michael Washington, though the nameplate on the hospital's top floor read, Michael Washington, founder and chairman of the board. He was worth approximately $800 million, having built his fortune through revolutionary medical technology patents and strategic investments in healthcare innovation. More importantly, he was the reason St. Mary's Children's Hospital existed at all. Michael stood slowly, his joints protesting the dampness, and walked toward the main entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a quiet whoosh, and he stepped into the warmth of the lobby. The familiar smell of antiseptic and the soft beeping of medical equipment felt like coming home. This hospital was his life's work. Every brick, every bed, every piece of life-saving equipment had been carefully chosen and funded through his foundation. He'd spent the last 15 years pouring his heart and fortune into creating a place where children could receive world-class medical care, regardless of their family's ability to pay. Tonight, he was here for a very specific reason. In the manila envelope he carried were the architectural plans for the new cardiac wing, a $25 million expansion that would triple the hospital's capacity to perform pediatric heart surgery. He'd spent months working with the best architects and medical equipment specialists to design something truly revolutionary. But Michael had a policy that had served him well throughout his career: never make important decisions from an ivory tower. He preferred to experience his investments from the ground level, to see how the people who worked in his buildings treated those they served. So tonight, Dr. Michael Washington, Billionaire founder, had chosen to dress like Michael Washington, working man. He wanted to observe the evening shift to see how his staff performed when they thought no one important was watching. He'd done this dozens of times over the years at his various hospitals and clinics. Sometimes he posed as a janitor, sometimes as a maintenance worker, occasionally as a concerned family member. Tonight, he'd simply chosen to look like someone who might be struggling financially, the kind of person his hospital was designed to help without judgment. The lobby was busier than usual. A young mother sat in the corner bouncing a crying infant while trying to fill out paperwork with her free hand. An elderly man in a wheelchair waited patiently by the information desk, his grandson beside him looking worried. Near the elevator, a teenager on crutches was arguing quietly with someone on his phone about insurance coverage. These were the people Michael had built this place for. The worried parents, the scared children, the families facing medical crises that could bankrupt them elsewhere. Here at St. Mary's, they were treated with dignity regardless of their circumstances. Or at least that was the intention. Michael walked slowly toward the information desk, wanting to observe how the evening staff interacted with patients. He'd learned more about his organization's true character through these informal visits than from any board report or administrative review. "Excuse me," he said quietly to the young woman behind the desk. She was new. He didn't recognize her from his previous visits. Her name tag read, Jessica, Patient Services. Jessica looked up from her computer screen and immediately her expression changed. Her smile, which had been warm for the previous visitor, became forced and slightly wary. "Yes?" she said, her tone noticeably cooler. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for information about cardiac surgery for children," Michael said. "My grandson, he needs an operation. The doctor said this place has the best pediatric cardiac unit in the state." It was true, though the grandson part was fictional. Michael had indeed built St. Mary's to have the finest pediatric cardiac unit on the East Coast. He'd recruited Dr. Elizabeth Chen from Johns Hopkins and Dr. James Robertson from Boston Children's Hospital, offering them resources most hospitals could only dream of. Jessica's eyes traveled from Michael's damp hair to his worn jacket, taking inventory of everything that suggested he didn't belong in a place this expensive. "Sir, are you a patient family member?" she asked, her voice taking on the careful tone people use when they're trying to be polite while expressing doubt. "Well, not yet," Michael replied honestly. "I'm trying to understand the process, the costs, what kind of assistance might be available." "Sir," Jessica interrupted, glancing around the lobby nervously, "I think you might want to check with the county hospital. They have programs for people in different financial situations. This facility primarily serves privately insured patients." Michael felt the familiar pang he experienced whenever he encountered this attitude. Jessica wasn't being intentionally cruel. She was making assumptions based on appearances, trying to save him from what she assumed would be an embarrassing conversation about costs he couldn't afford. But her assumption revealed something troubling about the culture he'd tried to build here. "I see," Michael said calmly. "And if someone couldn't afford treatment here, what would happen?" Jessica's discomfort was growing more obvious by the minute. She kept glancing toward the security desk, where a large man in a uniform was reading a magazine. "Well, we have to follow certain protocols," she said evasively. "Financial counseling, payment plans, that sort of thing. But honestly, sir, you might find the county facility more accommodating to your situation." The irony was staggering. Michael was being politely redirected away from the hospital he'd built specifically to ensure that families like the one he was pretending to represent would never be turned away. "I understand," Michael said, pulling out a worn leather wallet, one he'd owned since his residency days when every dollar had mattered. "Could I speak to someone in financial services, just to understand my options?" Jessica's eyes fixed on the wallet, and whatever she saw there seemed to confirm her assumptions. Her expression shifted from discomfort to something approaching pity, mixed with annoyance. "Sir, I really think you're going to find that this facility isn't the right fit. The consultation fees alone are substantial. Perhaps if you contacted the social services department at City General." "Is there a problem here?" The voice came from behind Michael. He turned to see Dr. Sarah Mitchell approaching, her perfectly styled hair and expensive suit creating a stark contrast to his own appearance. She'd obviously just arrived from the parking garage and was heading toward the elevators when she'd noticed the conversation at the information desk. Dr. Mitchell was exactly the kind of doctor Michael had hoped to attract to St. Mary's. Brilliant, accomplished, completely dedicated to pediatric medicine. Her surgical skills were legendary, and her success rate with complex cardiac procedures was among the best in the country. What Michael hadn't expected was the expression on her face as she looked at him. "Dr. Mitchell," Jessica said with obvious relief, "this gentleman was asking about cardiac surgery, but I was explaining that he might find better options at the county facility." Dr. Mitchell's gaze traveled over Michael's appearance with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making quick assessments. Her expression grew more disapproving with each detail she catalogued. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "this is a private medical facility. We require insurance verification, financial guarantees, and proper referrals before we can even discuss treatment options." Michael nodded slowly. "I understand. I was just hoping to learn about the process." "The process," Dr. Mitchell interrupted, "begins with a referral from your primary care physician and verification of your ability to pay for services. Without those basic requirements, I'm afraid we can't help you." She turned to Jessica. In the future, please direct inquiries like this to the appropriate public resources. We can't have people wandering in off the street expecting free consultations. Michael felt something twist in his chest. Dr. Mitchell wasn't wrong about protocols. Hospitals did need to verify insurance and collect payment. But the dismissive tone, the assumption that he was looking for charity, the clear implication that he didn't belong here, this wasn't the culture he'd tried to create. I see, Michael said quietly. And if someone couldn't afford treatment here, children would be turned away. Dr. Mitchell's expression hardened. Sir, this isn't a charity. We have financial assistance programs for qualified applicants, but we can't provide free medical care to every person who walks through our doors. Perhaps you don't understand how medical facilities operate. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Michael had heard that tone before, usually from people who assumed that someone who looked like him, dressed like him, couldn't possibly understand complex financial or medical concepts. Actually, Michael said, I understand quite well how medical facilities operate. I was wondering specifically about the mission statement posted right there on the wall. He pointed to a framed document near the information desk. Dr. Mitchell followed his gaze and read aloud, somewhat impatiently. St. Mary's Children's Hospital is dedicated to providing exceptional pediatric medical care to all children, regardless of their family's economic circumstances. Our commitment to healing extends beyond financial barriers to encompass every child who needs our help. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Michael had written that mission statement himself, sitting in this very lobby 3 years ago as he watched a young mother cry over paperwork she couldn't understand. He'd been dressed in a $1,000 suit that day, and every staff member had known exactly who he was. Tonight, in work clothes and worn boots, he was learning how well his mission statement was actually being implemented. That's a general philosophy, Dr. E. Mitchell said, clearly irritated by having the hospital's own words quoted back to her. But there are practical considerations. We can't just treat every person who shows up without proper documentation. Of course, Michael agreed. I'm just trying to understand what regardless of economic circumstances actually means in practice. Dr. Mitchell's patience was clearly exhausted. She turned to Jessica with an expression that suggested this conversation had gone on far too long. Please provide this gentleman with information about the free clinic downtown and the payment assistance programs at City General. And in the future, these conversations should be handled through proper channels. She started to walk away, but Michael's next words stopped her in her tracks. Dr. Mitchell, one more question. If a child needed emergency cardiac surgery tonight, and the family had no insurance, no money, no way to pay, what would happen? Doctor. Mitchell turned back, her face flushed with annoyance. Sir, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but I have a board meeting to attend. Security can help you find the exit. She gestured toward the security desk, where the uniformed guard had finally looked up from his magazine and was watching the conversation with interest. Michael felt the full weight of what was happening. In his own hospital, at a facility he'd built and funded specifically to help families like the one he was pretending to represent, he was about to be escorted out by security. The irony was breathtaking. But more than that, it was heartbreaking. He thought about the children upstairs receiving treatment that his money had made possible. He thought about the state-of-the-art equipment his foundation had purchased, the world-class doctors he'd recruited, the buildings he'd constructed brick by brick. And he thought about families like the fictional one he'd described, families with desperately sick children who might walk into this lobby seeking help and be met with suspicion, condescension, and ultimately rejection. I understand, Michael said finally. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps I should speak to security. What, doctor? Sarah Mitchell didn't know was that she was about to get exactly what she'd asked for. The only difference was that the conversation with security was going to be very different from what she expected. Michael Washington watched Dr. Mitchell signal to the security guard, and something profound settled over him like a heavy blanket. Not anger. He'd learned long ago that anger was rarely productive. Not surprise. He'd witnessed prejudice enough times to recognize its patterns. What he felt was a deep, quiet sadness for what this moment revealed about human nature. The security guard, a heavy-set man in his 60s with kind eyes and graying temples, approached slowly. His name tag read Frank Rodriguez, and Michael could see the reluctance in his movements. Frank had obviously been doing this job long enough to recognize the difference between a genuine security threat and a situation that had gotten out of hand. "Evening, sir," Frank said with careful politeness. "I understand there might be some confusion here." Michael appreciated the diplomacy. Frank wasn't assuming anything, wasn't treating him like a threat, just a professional trying to understand the situation. "No confusion," Michael said quietly. "I was asking about pediatric cardiac surgery, and Dr. Mitchell felt it would be better if I spoke with you." Frank glanced between Michael and Dr. Mitchell, clearly trying to piece together what had transpired. "Sir, are you looking for medical treatment for someone?" "Potentially," Michael replied. "I was trying to understand how this hospital handles families who might need financial assistance." Dr. Mitchell stepped forward impatiently. "Frank, this gentleman has been taking up staff time with questions he should be directing to appropriate social services. He doesn't seem to understand that this is a private facility." Frank nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he was still trying to understand why this required security intervention. "Sir, would you like me to help you contact the Patient Financial Services Department? They might be able to answer your questions better than—" "Frank," Dr. Mitchell interrupted, her voice taking on the sharp edge of authority. "I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. This situation needs to be resolved now." Michael watched the interaction with growing fascination. Dr. Mitchell was clearly a woman accustomed to having her directives followed without question. Frank, to his credit, was trying to handle the situation with dignity rather than force. But the underlying assumption was still there, that Michael was a problem to be solved rather than a person seeking information. "Sir," Frank said, turning back to Michael, "perhaps it would be best if you made an appointment during regular business hours. The evening staff has limited ability to help with financial assistance questions." It was a reasonable suggestion, delivered kindly. Michael found himself respecting Frank's approach even as he recognized the fundamental issue. He was being politely ejected from his own hospital. "I understand," Michael said. "Before I go, could I ask you something, Frank?" "Sure, sir." "How long have you worked here?" Frank's expression softened slightly. 8 years in March. It's a good place to work. They treat their employees well." Michael nodded. Frank had no idea he was talking to the man who had personally approved the healthcare benefits package that made St. Mary's one of the best places to work in the city. The man who had insisted on above-market wages for security staff, because he believed everyone who contributed to the hospital's mission deserved to be valued. "And in those 8 years," Michael continued, "how many people have you had to escort out for asking about medical care they couldn't afford?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Frank's discomfort was obvious. He clearly didn't like the implication that he was removing someone who genuinely needed help. "Sir, that's not... we don't usually..." Frank struggled to find words that wouldn't acknowledge the uncomfortable truth. Dr. Mitchell's impatience reached its breaking point. "Frank, enough. Please escort this gentleman to the exit. I have responsibilities to attend to." As she spoke, Michael's mind drifted to a memory that felt simultaneously distant and immediate. 15 years earlier, Michael had been standing in the ruins of the old Jefferson Community Center, a crumbling building in the heart of the city's most underserved neighborhood. The place where he'd grown up, where his mother had brought him for free meals during the hardest times, where he'd learned that kindness could exist even in the midst of poverty. The community center was being demolished to make room for luxury condos, another piece of the neighborhood's heart being carved out for profit. That morning, Michael had received the call that changed everything. His old mentor, Dr. Ruth Williams, the pediatric surgeon who had operated on his younger sister when they couldn't afford insurance, was retiring. She was leaving because the public hospital where she worked was being defunded, its pediatric wing closing due to budget cuts. "The children have nowhere to go, Michael," she'd told him during their lunch meeting. "The wealthy kids get treated at the private hospitals uptown, The poor kids. They travel 2 hours to the county facility, if they're lucky. Most just go without care. Standing in those ruins, Michael had made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would build something different, a hospital that would serve children regardless of their family's circumstances, a place where the quality of care would be determined by medical need, not financial capacity. He'd spent 2 years planning every detail. The location, accessible by public transportation from every neighborhood in the city. The staffing, he'd recruited doctors like Dr. Mitchell not just for their skill, but for their stated commitment to serving all children. The financial structure, a complex system of insurance billing, foundation support, and sliding scale payments that would ensure no child was ever turned away. The mission statement he'd crafted had been more than words on a wall. It had been a promise he was now watching, being broken. "Sir?" Frank's voice brought Michael back to the present. "Sir, are you all right?" Michael realized he'd been standing silently for nearly a minute, lost in the memory of why this place existed. Dr. Mitchell was checking her watch impatiently, and Jessica at the information desk was pretending not to watch, while clearly fascinated by the drama unfolding. "I'm fine," Michael said. "Frank, I appreciate your kindness. You've been more helpful than you know." Frank looked confused but pleased by the compliment. "Just doing my job, sir." "Actually," Michael said, "you've been doing much more than your job. You've been treating me with dignity in a situation where that wasn't required. That says something about your character." Dr. Mitchell made an exasperated noise. "This is ridiculous. Frank, please." "Dr. Mitchell," Michael interrupted gently, "I have one more question before I go." She crossed her arms and stared at him with undisguised annoyance. "What?" "The board meeting you're rushing to, what's on the agenda?" Her expression shifted to suspicion. "I don't see how that's any of your business." "Humor me." Dr. Mitchell glanced at Frank as if to say, "See what I've been dealing with," then answered curtly, "If you must know, we're discussing the proposed cardiac surgery expansion, a new wing that would triple our capacity for pediatric heart surgery." Michael nodded slowly. "That sounds expensive." $25 million, she said, as if the number proved her point about the hospital's exclusive nature, the kind of investment that requires serious financial backing from serious people. And where would that money come from? Dr. Mitchell's patience snapped completely. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not going to stand here discussing hospital finances with a complete stranger. Frank, either escort this man out or I'll call the police myself." The threat hung in the air like a slap. Michael felt something shift inside him, not anger but a crystalline clarity about what needed to happen next. If this story is touching your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. He reached into his manila envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Not the architectural plans, those would come later. This was something simpler, but more immediate. "Dr. Mitchell," he said, his voice still calm but carrying a new authority. "Before you have me arrested, perhaps you should look at this." He handed her the paper. She took it reluctantly, her eyes scanning the document with growing confusion. It was a hospital employee directory, a simple list of names, positions, and contact information. Nothing that would seem significant to someone who didn't know what they were looking at. But Dr. Mitchell's name was on that list, as was Frank's, as was Jessica's, as was every single person employed by St. Mary's Children's Hospital. And at the top of the page, in the box marked "Founder and Chairman of the Board," was a name she was beginning to recognize with growing horror. Dr. Michael Washington. "I don't understand," she whispered, her face going pale as the implications began to sink in. Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple leather wallet. The same worn wallet that had helped convince Jessica he couldn't afford treatment at the hospital. But now he opened it and pulled out a business card. Dr. Michael Washington, founder and chairman, St. Mary's Children's Hospital Foundation. Dr. Mitchell stared at the card, then at the employee directory, then at Michael's face, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Frank, who had been watching the exchange with growing interest, stepped closer and read the card over Dr. Mitchell's shoulder. His expression went through a series of rapid changes: confusion, recognition, and finally, absolute mortification. "Oh my God," Frank whispered. "Dr. Washington, sir, I am so sorry. I had no idea." Michael held up a hand gently. "Frank, you have nothing to apologize for. You treated me with respect and professionalism throughout this entire encounter. That's exactly what I hope for from everyone who works here." Dr. Mitchell was still staring at the card as if it might disappear if she looked away. "This is impossible. You can't be." "I can't be what?" Michael asked quietly. The question hung in the air, laden with implications that no one in the lobby wanted to voice out loud. But Michael already knew the answer. He could see it in Dr. Mitchell's expression, in her inability to reconcile his appearance with his position, in the assumptions she'd made from the moment she'd seen him. The most painful part wasn't her surprise. It was the growing realization that this conversation, this entire evening, had revealed something fundamental about the institution he'd built and the people he'd trusted to run it. The hospital he'd created to ensure that children like his sister would never be turned away had just tried to turn away its own founder. And if they could make that mistake with him, what were they doing to the families who really needed help? The lobby of St. Mary's Children's Hospital had never felt so silent. Dr. Mitchell stood frozen, the business card trembling in her hands like a leaf in a storm. Frank Rodriguez, 8-year veteran of hospital security, looked like a man watching his career flash before his eyes. Even Jessica at the information desk had abandoned any pretense of working and was staring openly at the unfolding scene. "Dr. Washington," Dr. Mitchell whispered, her voice barely audible. You're actually the founder of this hospital," Michael confirmed gently. "The person whose foundation pays your salary, funds your research, and made tonight's board meeting possible." Dr. Mitchell's legs seemed to give out. She sank into one of the lobby chairs, still clutching his business card. Her perfect composure, the authoritative bearing that had commanded respect from colleagues and patients alike, crumbled completely. "But you look like—" she started, then stopped, horrified by what she'd almost said. "Like what?" Michael asked, his tone still calm but carrying an unmistakable steel underneath. "Like someone who doesn't belong here? Like someone who couldn't possibly understand how medical facilities operate? Like someone who should be directed to the county hospital?" Each word hit Dr. Mitchell like a physical blow. She could hear her own statements from 10 minutes ago being reflected back at her, and the shame on her face was unmistakable. Frank stepped forward, his voice thick with mortification. "Dr. Washington, sir, I am so incredibly sorry. If I had known who you were—" "Frank," Michael interrupted, turning to face the security guard with something approaching warmth. "You have absolutely nothing to apologize for. In fact, you're the only person tonight who has behaved exactly as I'd hoped." Frank looked confused. "Sir? You treated me with dignity and respect even when you thought I was just someone down on his luck looking for help. You were professional without being dismissive, helpful without being condescending. That's exactly the standard I hope for from everyone who works here." Michael walked closer to Frank, his voice taking on a different quality. "In 8 years, you've never once made someone feel unwelcome in this lobby, have you?" Frank shook his head slowly. "No, sir. Everyone who comes through those doors is dealing with something difficult. Last thing they need is to feel judged." "Exactly," Michael said. "That's what this place was supposed to be about." He turned back to Dr. Mitchell, who was watching the exchange with growing horror as she began to understand the full magnitude of her mistake. "Dr. Mitchell?" Michael said, his voice still gentle but carrying undeniable authority. "Perhaps now would be a good time to discuss that board meeting you're so eager to attend." She looked up at him with the expression of someone who had just realized they were standing at the edge of a cliff. "Dr. Washington, I don't know what to say. I made a terrible mistake. I judged you based on your appearance, and I was completely wrong." "Yes, you were," Michael agreed. "But the mistake you made runs deeper than simple prejudice, doesn't it?" Dr. Mitchell's confusion was evident. "I don't understand." Michael reached into his manila envelope and pulled out the architectural plans that had been his original reason for coming tonight. He unfolded them on the small table between the lobby chairs, revealing detailed blueprints for the new cardiac surgery wing. $25 million, he said, echoing her earlier words. The expansion you're so excited to discuss with the board tonight. Dr. Mitchell stared at the plans, recognition dawning slowly. These are... But how do you have the architect's blueprints? The board hasn't even seen these yet. Because I commissioned them, Michael said simply. I spent the last 6 months working with the best medical architects in the country to design this expansion. Every detail has been carefully planned to maximize both surgical capacity and patient comfort. He pointed to specific sections of the blueprint. 12 new surgical suites, each equipped with the most advanced pediatric cardiac technology available. Recovery rooms designed to accommodate families who might need to sleep in the hospital for weeks. A parent resource center with shower facilities, a kitchen, and comfortable sleeping areas. Dr. Mitchell studied the plans with growing amazement. As head of pediatric surgery, she could immediately see how revolutionary this design would be. This is incredible. The layout, the equipment specifications, the family accommodations. This would be the most advanced pediatric cardiac facility in the country. That's the idea, Michael said. I want children from anywhere in the region to receive the best possible care here, regardless of their family's circumstances. But the cost, Dr. Mitchell said, her practical mind already calculating. $25 million is just for construction. The equipment, the staffing, the operational costs. You're looking at closer to $40 million for the complete project. Michael nodded. $42.5 million actually. I have the complete financial projection. He pulled another document from his envelope, a comprehensive funding proposal that detailed not just the construction costs, but endowment funds for staffing, equipment maintenance, and operational support for the next decade. Dr. Mitchell read through the proposal, her expression shifting from amazement to something approaching awe. You're proposing to fund the entire project yourself? Construction, equipment, staffing, everything? That was the plan, Michael said quietly. The past tense of his statement hung in the air like a question mark. Was? Dr. Mitchell looked up from the documents, sudden fear creeping into her voice. Michael was quiet for a long moment, studying the woman who had just spent 15 minutes trying to have him removed from his own hospital. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was undeniably brilliant. Her surgical skills were legendary, her dedication to pediatric medicine unquestionable, but tonight had revealed something else about her character. Dr. Mitchell, he said finally, what do you think would have happened if I had been exactly who you assumed I was? A worried grandfather asking about cardiac surgery for a child, but without insurance or the ability to pay? Dr. Mitchell's face went pale as she began to understand where this was leading. Dr. Washington, our financial assistance programs. Would I have learned about those programs tonight? Michael interrupted. Based on how I was treated, would someone in that situation have felt welcome to explore their options? The question hung in the air unanswered because they all knew the answer. You told Jessica to direct future inquiries like mine to appropriate public resources, Michael continued. You said we couldn't have people wandering in off the street expecting free consultations. You suggested I didn't understand how medical facilities operate. Each statement was delivered calmly, but the cumulative effect was devastating. And then, Michael said, his voice still controlled but carrying unmistakable pain. When I asked about the mission statement, the promise I wrote myself, you called it a general philosophy with practical considerations. Dr. Mitchell was crying now, tears streaming down her face as the full weight of her actions became clear. Dr. Washington, please. I made a terrible mistake. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, but I'm not a bad person. I dedicated my life to helping children. I believe that, Michael said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. Your surgical record speaks for itself. The lives you've saved, the families you've helped, that's real. That matters. Hope flickered in Dr. Mitchell's eyes. But tonight, Michael continued. You revealed something troubling about how this institution operates. If the head of pediatric surgery can look at someone seeking help and immediately assume they don't belong here, what message does that send to the rest of the staff? He gestured around the lobby. How many families have been subtly discouraged from seeking care here? How many children have gone without treatment because their parents felt unwelcome the moment they walked through those doors? Dr. Mitchell had no answer, because there was no good answer. Michael walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. His old truck was still there, surrounded by the luxury cars of doctors and administrators who could afford to work at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the region. I dress like this sometimes because I want to see the real culture of my institutions, he said without turning around. Not the polished performance people put on when they know the boss is watching, but the actual day-to-day reality of how we treat people. He turned back to face the lobby. Tonight I learned that 15 years after building this place, we're still failing the mission I set out to accomplish. Dr. Mitchell stood up, her voice desperate. Dr. Washington, please give me a chance to make this right. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll retrain the entire staff, implement new protocols, anything you want. Michael studied her for a long moment. Dr. Mitchell, what would you do if I told you I was reconsidering the cardiac expansion? The color drained from her face completely. You can't. The children who need this facility deserve better than being treated like charity cases, Michael finished. They deserve to be welcomed with dignity, to have their questions answered with patience, to feel like their lives matter regardless of their family's bank account. He picked up the architectural plans and began folding them carefully. The question isn't whether these children deserve better care. The question is whether this institution is capable of providing it with the respect and dignity every family deserves. Dr. Mitchell watched him fold the plans with the expression of someone watching their life's work disappear. Dr. Washington, please. Let me prove to you that we can do better. Give me one chance to show you that tonight was an aberration, not the norm. Michael paused in his folding. One chance. One chance. Any test you want, any situation you want to observe. Let me prove that this staff, this hospital, can live up to the mission you created. Frank, who had been listening to the exchange in stunned silence, stepped forward. Dr. Washington, if I may, in 8 years of working here, I've seen Dr. Mitchell stay past midnight with worried parents, donate her own money to families who couldn't afford medications, perform surgeries for free when the administration wasn't looking. Tonight was wrong, but it's not who she really is. Michael looked at Frank with surprise. The security guard's defense of Dr. Mitchell showed the kind of institutional loyalty and character that gave him hope. Frank, Michael said, that's exactly the kind of insight I was hoping to gain tonight. He turned back to Dr. Mitchell, still holding the folded architectural plans. One chance, Dr. Mitchell, but not the kind of test you're expecting. What do you mean? Michael walked back to the information desk where Jessica was still watching the entire scene with wide eyes. Jessica, could you call the emergency department and ask them to send down whatever pediatric cardiac case files they have from families currently waiting for insurance approval? Jessica looked confused but reached for her phone. Dr. Washington? All of them? All of them, Michael confirmed. Every child currently in our system who needs cardiac surgery but hasn't been scheduled due to insurance or payment issues. Dr. Mitchell's expression shifted as she began to understand what he was proposing. You want me to operate on children whose families can't pay? I want you to prove that the mission statement on that wall means something, Michael said. I want you to show me that when faced with children who need help, this hospital chooses healing over profit. He handed her the architectural plans. If you can do that, if you can show me that St. Mary's truly serves all children regardless of their circumstances, then we'll discuss the expansion. Dr. Mitchell took the plans with shaking hands. And if I can't? Michael was quiet for a moment. Then I'll build the cardiac center somewhere else. Somewhere that understands what it means to serve children without judgment. The choice was hers. The future of St. Mary's Children's Hospital hung in the balance, and everything depended on whether Dr. Sarah Mitchell could prove that tonight's cruelty was the exception, not the rule. 3 hours had passed since Dr. Sarah Mitchell had taken the architectural plans from Michael's hands. 3 hours since she had been given the chance to prove that St. Mary's Children's Hospital could live up to its founder's vision. Michael sat in the small family waiting area on the 3rd floor, watching through the window as the rain continued to fall against the glass. He'd changed from his worn clothes into the simple black suit he kept in his office. Not the expensive designer suits he wore to formal events, but something appropriate for what the night had become. Frank Rodriguez sat across from him, still processing everything that had happened. The security guard had refused to leave, saying he wanted to see how the story ended. Michael appreciated the company. "Dr. Washington," Frank said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why do you do this?" "The disguise thing, I mean. You could just review reports, look at statistics, hire consultants. Why put yourself through tonight?" Michael considered the question carefully. It was one he'd asked himself many times over the years. "Frank, you know what the hardest part about having money is?" Frank shook his head. "Everyone tells you what they think you want to hear. Board members give glowing reports because they need funding. Staff members smile and nod because they need their jobs. Patients' families express gratitude even when they're not entirely satisfied because they're afraid their complaints might affect their care." Michael stood and walked to the window. The only way to know the truth about an institution is to experience it from the ground level, to see how people behave when they think their actions don't matter. And tonight? Tonight I learned that good intentions aren't enough. That building something doesn't guarantee it will serve its purpose. That constant vigilance is the price of maintaining an institution's soul. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Mitchell. She looked exhausted but determined, still wearing her surgical scrubs beneath her white coat. In her hands was a thick folder filled with patient files. "Dr. Washington," she said, her voice hoarse from the emotional strain of the evening. "I have the files you requested." Michael turned from the window. "How many?" 17 children currently in our system who need cardiac surgery but haven't been scheduled due to insurance or payment issues. Ages ranging from 6 months to 16 years. Conditions from relatively simple septal defects to complex congenital anomalies that require multiple staged procedures. Dr. Mitchell opened the folder and pulled out the first file. Isabella Rodriguez, 8 years old, needs repair of a ventricular septal defect. Her father works construction, no insurance, mother cleans houses. They've been waiting 4 months for Medicaid approval. She pulled out another file. James Thompson, 3 years old, hypoplastic left heart syndrome requiring the Norwood procedure. Family has insurance, but it's inadequate for the complexity of the surgery. They've been trying to raise money through online fundraising. File after file, Dr. Mitchell presented the cases with the clinical precision of a surgeon, but the emotional weight of someone who had spent 3 hours truly seeing these children for the first time. "Dr. Washington," she said when she'd finished reviewing the cases, "I want to operate on all of them, starting tomorrow. Insurance status irrelevant, payment plans irrelevant. These children need surgery, and we have the capability to provide it." Michael studied her carefully. "Dr. Mitchell, do you understand what you're proposing? 17 cardiac surgeries for patients who can't pay? The financial impact alone would be enormous." "I understand perfectly," she said without hesitation. "I'm proposing that we honor the mission statement you wrote, that we prove this hospital serves children, not profit margins." Frank leaned forward in his chair. "Doc, what changed your mind?" Dr. Mitchell turned to look at the security guard who had unknowingly defended her earlier. "I spent 3 hours reading these files, Frank. Really reading them. Not just the medical details, but the stories. The families who've been waiting, hoping, praying for someone to give their children a chance." She pulled out one particular file. "This is Maria Santos, 7 years old. She needs surgery to repair tetralogy of Fallot. Her grandmother brought her here 6 weeks ago, and our financial counselor told them to try the county hospital because the surgery would cost more than their house is worth." Dr. Mitchell's voice was thick with emotion. Maria's grandmother didn't speak much English, but she kept saying por favor, and pointing to Maria's chest where you could see her heart struggling to pump. And we sent them away. Michael felt the familiar pain in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced earlier in the lobby when confronted with the gap between intention and reality. "Dr. Mitchell," he said gently, "what you're proposing would effectively bankrupt the hospital within a year if it became standard practice." "No, it wouldn't," she replied, surprising him with her certainty. She opened her folder again and pulled out a different set of papers, financial projections she'd obviously spent considerable time preparing. "I've been thinking about this for 3 hours," she said. "The 17 children we're discussing represent approximately $2.8 million in unpaid surgical procedures. That sounds like a lot until you consider that this hospital's annual budget is over $400 million. Michael raised an eyebrows. Dr. Mitchell had clearly done her homework. "More importantly," she continued, "if we perform these surgeries and document the outcomes properly, we can use the data to apply for federal grants, state funding, and foundation support for indigent care. The initial investment becomes the foundation for a sustainable program." She handed him her calculations. "I propose we create the St. Mary's Guardian Angel Fund, a dedicated program for children whose families can't afford cardiac surgery. We perform the initial cases using hospital reserves, document everything meticulously, and then use those success stories to fundraise for the program's continuation." Michael studied her projections with growing amazement. Dr. Mitchell hadn't just had an emotional awakening, she'd created a practical solution. "The Guardian Angel Fund," he repeated. "Interesting name." "I thought you might appreciate the reference," she said with a small smile. "After all, you've been this hospital's guardian angel for 15 years. Frank stood up suddenly. "Doc, there's something I think you both should see." He walked to the window and pointed toward the main entrance below. In the lobby, visible through the glass doors, a small crowd had gathered. Families with children, some in wheelchairs, some carrying crying infants, some just sitting patiently in the waiting area. "Word got out somehow," Frank said. "About what happened tonight, about Dr. Washington being here, about the possibility of hope." Michael and Dr. Mitchell joined Frank at the window. The scene below was heartbreaking and beautiful simultaneously. Families who had been waiting for months or years for their children to receive care, gathering because they'd heard that things might finally change. "How did they find out?" Michael asked. Jessica from the information desk appeared in the doorway, looking embarrassed but determined. "Dr. Washington, I'm sorry, but I may have mentioned to a few families that there might be developments regarding the hospital's financial assistance policies." Michael looked at the young woman who had initially tried to redirect him away from the hospital. "Jessica, what changed your mind about me?" She blushed deeply. "Dr. Washington, after you left for upstairs, I started thinking about how I treated you, and I realized I've been doing the same thing to other families for months. Making assumptions based on how people look, discouraging them from seeking care here because I assumed they couldn't afford it." She gestured toward the window. "Those families down there? They've all been here before. They've all been told to try somewhere else, to apply for programs, to wait for approval that might never come. When I called to tell them about possible changes, they came immediately." Michael felt something powerful stirring in his chest. This was what he had envisioned 15 years ago when he'd first conceived of St. Mary's, a place where desperate families could find hope instead of obstacles. Dr. Mitchell moved closer to the window, studying the faces below. "Dr. Washington, I see Maria Santos and her grandmother down there, and the Thompson family with little James. They heard somehow and came back." "What do you want to do?" Michael asked. "Doctor." Mitchell straightened her shoulders with the determination that had made her one of the finest pediatric surgeons in the country. "I want to go down there and start scheduling surgeries. Tonight. I want to tell those families that their children will receive the care they need regardless of their ability to pay." Michael studied her face, seeing not just professional competence but genuine compassion. The woman who had tried to have him removed from the lobby had transformed into someone willing to fight for the mission he'd created. "Dr. Mitchell," he said, "if we do this, there's no going back. Once we establish this precedent, we'll be committed to maintaining it. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" Dr. Washington, she replied without hesitation. I've been avoiding that responsibility for too long. Tonight taught me that being a great surgeon isn't enough if I'm not also willing to fight for access to surgery. Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. Not the worn wallet he'd carried earlier, but the kind of financial instrument that could change institutions overnight. The Guardian Angel Fund, he said, writing carefully. Initial endowment, $10 million. He tore out the check and handed it to Dr. Mitchell. This should cover the immediate surgeries and provide seed money for the long-term program. Dr. Mitchell stared at the check with tears in her eyes. $10 million. Dr. Washington, this is going to save lives. No, Michael corrected gently. You're going to save lives. This is just going to make it possible. He walked back to his chair and picked up the architectural plans for the cardiac expansion. And Dr. Mitchell, about the new wing. She looked up from the check, hope and fear warring in her expression. Michael unfolded the plans one more time. I think we're going to need it sooner than originally planned. If we're going to start performing charity surgeries for children throughout the region, we'll need the capacity to handle the volume. The smile that spread across Dr. Mitchell's face was radiant. Dr. Washington, are you saying? I'm saying that tonight you proved something I was beginning to doubt, that institutions can change, that people can grow, and that the mission I wrote 15 years ago is still worth fighting for. Michael stood and extended his hand to Dr. Mitchell. Congratulations, Dr. Mitchell. You're now the director of the St. Mary's Guardian Angel Fund, in addition to your surgical duties. I hope you're prepared for some very long days. She shook his hand with the grip of someone sealing a sacred commitment. Dr. Washington, I've never been more ready for anything in my life. Frank was grinning from ear to ear. Doc, this is like a Christmas miracle or something. Michael laughed, the first time he'd genuinely laughed all evening. Frank, Christmas is 2 months away. Let's call it a reminder that sometimes the best gifts come disguised as the worst experiences. As they prepared to go downstairs to meet with the waiting families, Michael paused at the window one more time. The scene below had grown. More families had arrived, word spreading through the community that something extraordinary was happening at St. Mary's. Dr. Mitchell, he said quietly, do you remember what you said earlier about people wandering in off the street expecting free consultations? She winced at the memory. I remember, and I'm ashamed of it. Don't be ashamed, Michael said. Be grateful. Because tonight you learned that sometimes the most important people in your life are the ones who wander in off the street, looking for help. He turned from the window and headed toward the elevator. Now let's go tell those families that their children's lives are about to change. Dr. Mitchell and Frank followed him, and as the elevator doors closed, Michael reflected on the evening's events. He'd come to the hospital tonight planning to observe quietly and deliver architectural plans. Instead, he'd experienced heartbreak, witnessed transformation, and found renewed hope for the institution he'd built. Sometimes the most powerful changes began with the simplest acts of courage, the courage to ask for help when you needed it, the courage to admit when you were wrong, and the courage to do better when given a second chance. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Click the next one, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes in kindness. As the elevator descended toward the lobby full of waiting families, Michael Washington smiled. He'd started the evening disguised as someone seeking help and ended it as someone who had found exactly what he'd been looking for all along. Not just a hospital that served children, but a community of people willing to fight for the belief that every child's life was worth saving, regardless of their family's circumstances. Sometimes the most extraordinary miracles happened in the most ordinary moments. Sometimes the people who looked like they didn't belong were exactly where they needed to be. And sometimes, the greatest gift you could give someone was the chance to become the person they were meant to be. The doors opened, and together they walked toward the families who had been waiting for this moment their entire lives.